Hey everybody, welcome to the Daily Objective. And today, of course, is Freedom Friday, but a much more somber one than usual because today, of course, is a very sad day on the calendar, of course, September 11th. And we're going to be talking about that today. Something that comes to mind on 9/11 for me always, especially this particular year, is actually something that happened about a week after the tragedy, which was Jay Leno returning to the air for his nightly show. And there was some anticipation like, oh, how are the comedians gonna, the late night comedians gonna respond to all this? What are they gonna say? And Jay Leno said something. I tried to find the video of it, but I couldn't. It's not anywhere online, but I'll paraphrase from memory, as I often do. He said something like, I don't know, but like anyone who could just do something like go out, volunteer somewhere, donate blood, make a sandwich. I don't know. Just thank you for doing that. And, he got some applause for that. And I was 14 years old at the time. And I remember wondering, like, why did he mention making a sandwich? Like, why does that go in the same category as donating blood and stuff like that? But it stuck with me, I think, for a reason. And over the years, as I've entered adulthood, it's made more and more sense. Sometimes just kind of taking care of myself and sticking with the program could be the best way to sort of be of service to myself and to the people around me. And this year, especially with the sort of moratorium on civilization that we've seen and the arsenic attack on it as well, some days just making the bed, cooking some dinner, washing the dishes can be just truly the most meaningful and effective way to carry through. So there's my little opening monologue. And I'd like to introduce somebody who, let's just say it's not all sad news. We've got a guy joining us as a reoccurring co-host here on the Daily Objective. This is big, guys. People often tell me, oh, I grew up watching you, they tell me. People my age, it's always nice when someone 2 years younger than me says they grew up watching me. But today I get to pass along that gesture to a guy who I was watching him, 10, 12, even 15 years ago, whatever it was, late 2000s. He was on Fox News, Fox Business, shouting in the name of liberty, shouting down all the big government, statist, anti-capitalist Republicans on the network, as well as the token Democrat in the corner. And I'm proud to say, like, this guy has really, he's influenced me, he's influenced us, and he turned out to be, as I later found out, a serious student of Ayn Rand's philosophy, objectivism. So I knew I liked him for a reason. Please welcome the man, the myth, Jonathan Hoenig.
Thank you, Rucka. Thank you, Nikos. Thank you both for having me. I'm so honored to be part of what you guys are doing here. It's completely grassroots. It's very knowledgeable, earnest. It's cutting edge, and as they say, ripped from the headlines. So there's a lot to say, and I'm delighted to be part of what you're doing here on Facebook and with the Ayn Rand Center UK, and I'm happy to support the center as well. Rucka, how old were you on 9/11, if I can ask?
Oh, I was 14.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really impressionable. It's an impressionable age, and for me, I was in my 20s. I was a couple years older, and it was equally impressionable. It still is. You're right, Rucka. It's a somber day for me. Certainly more somber than kind of any other American holiday. It's one that really still stings. I'll quickly tell my story in that I was doing something that's not so different than what I'm doing right now. I was sitting in an office watching computer monitors, watching the screens, and my first knowledge that something had happened on 9/11 came when I saw my computer screen full of trading figures and positions, la-di-da. Usually at that hour in the morning, it's pretty quiet, but all of a sudden, the screen went red. And it, in hindsight, kind of set the tone of what was obviously going to transpire that day, and in the subsequent, whatever it's been, 19 years. It was just a sea of red, and the day obviously got bad and got worse. We don't need to rehash specifics, but I can just remember one of my feelings of walking around downtown Chicago, guys, and looking up at the Sears Tower, and it was ghost town, and wanting nothing else than to get the hell out of there with the almost certainty that was going to be next. And again, we don't, it still stings for me. It still stings. I think it was a shock to me. Well, it's so personally painful, first and foremost, because of the love of, as you said, I mean, I'm an investor, I'm a trader, it's what I do. And, although I didn't know anyone, well, I knew people personally, I didn't have any family in the World Trade Center. I'd actually been there. I brought this because I'd been there as a kid with my father. This is the pamphlet that they gave us as the souvenir pamphlet when I went to the World Trade Center as a kid. And I love this headline. Their headline is "The Closest that Some of Us Would Ever Get to Heaven." And that was my memory of the World Trade Center. It was like, I'm obviously not religious. I don't believe in heaven. But if I did, you were right up there with it. You had the whole city at your feet. It was a magical building. It was a incredible testament to what man can do. Man can build this amazing machine of intricate systems. The Board of Trade, the New York Board of Trade, the Commodities Exchange was there. Or if you've ever seen Trading Places, they come up from the subway and to me, it was this purposefully, of course, it was a symbol of trade, of America, of American success and prosperity. And, we'll get into the specifics of the aftermath of it, but it's a hard day for me. It's a very solemn one. It's one where I really think of the families of those affected, the victims. People say, oh, well, it was only 3,000 people and COVID's been 10,000. But, it stings because this was 3,000 innocent people who did not have to die, who were murdered. They were murdered. When you think about, it's hard for me to see the footage because when you think about the animalistic ideas, we always say it's all about ideas. It really all comes down to ideas. And it was a shock to me then and now that there's people who actually hold ideas that it's a good thing to get in you swear on this show? I don't know. Let's just say a goddamn fucking plane and drive that plane into building of innocent people. It's still shocking to me that those ideas exist in the world. I fear that they've grown in the world in the subsequent 19 years. And it's hard to be anything other than a real solemn, troubling day for that reason.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And let's bring on a guy, another co-host who you all know. Now, he's actually not American. He lives in Greece. This is just another day for him. It's probably, I hope he's having a great day. No reason for him to care, right? I'm joking, of course. Nikos Sotirakopoulos.
Thanks, Rucka, and thank Jonathan. And I really like what you said about this pamphlet. Was really touching. So this day is very somber for me because it's one day that I'm really ashamed for how myself and many other people view that day. I was very young. That's not an excuse. But the reason I'm going to share this story is not to condemn Greece or say Greeks are bad people. It's actually to show how powerful is culture and ideas. So here's what happened. So we see this event, and the first reaction when people were talking back in the day was with text messages. The reactions were somewhere between this was an inside job or one of the deals of the Americans with bad people like the Mujahedin went wrong, or maybe it was the Mossad. These were the first three reactions. Then the next day what started was the circulation of jokes through, again, text. So I don't want to reproduce them, but most of the people had the idea that what happened was not a tragedy. It was a mystery. It was something that had to be understood, but had to be understood because there was supposedly a big secret behind it. And for example, the third biggest party of the Greek parliament, which was a communist party, the official line was, we don't sanction, but also we don't condemn. And the idea was that who knows who was behind it. And also you have probably two moral equals there. You have the imperialists and their moral equals who were the Islamic fundamentalists. And who knows, maybe these people are the same. And actually there was a lot of pressure from the left towards the Communist Party saying this is a very soft view. A week later, we had the first football games in Greece. There was a booing on the 1 minute of silence, and there were many songs mocking the attack. And I will give you an example of a person I knew who he lives in a small town somewhere in the countryside, and he's a sweet boy, middle class, center left, so not a radical. And I remember having a discussion with his mother a bit after that, and she said something that stuck with me. She said his first reaction was go out and said, finally, America gets a taste of its own medicine. Now, this was not a radical. This was not a bad person. This was a person who would climb up a tree to save a cat. So where am I going with all this? So having grown up in a country with the idea that the West is bad, materialism is bad. Actually, for everything that's wrong that has happened to Greece, it's the mistake of someone else and actually of the United States. Bad ideas can dehumanize you, can make you have such a tunnel vision that when in retrospect you see such a huge tragedy, people who are very, very, very good people can turn into something without, I don't even have words. And again, this is not me condemning. I was somewhere there in all these ideas, and it's one thing that I'm really ashamed of. But the best thing I can do, because there's no point in slamming yourself and saying how bad you were, is try to correct this moral mistake by at least trying to understand what caused this and try to fight it in the present and in the future.
Yeah. What's interesting, more interesting than religious people, causing damage. I mean, we can see that through history, mystics acting irrationally and being hostile to technology and civilization and any conception of capitalism, any form of trade. But to see the West become what it's become in recent centuries and in recent decades, it's something science fiction writers could never have imagined, back in the 19th century or whenever. It's just, it's really something. And it's the kind of what contributed to my teenage angst is just not having the context. Like, well, who is right and what is going on here? So it is, philosophy truly is what's missing from the equation when understanding the state of all these different cultures, as well as knowing how to deal with all of it. It's,
well, Rucka,
really,
I can interrupt.
yes.
You were probably being fed, even as I was, and as the country was, the whole kind of, Islam is peace. Islam is a religion of peace. And what we need to do is, bring democracy to the Middle East. And this is nothing, this is not about ideas. So you were probably being kind of fed somewhat of a mixed message. I mean, I don't know. I remember Bush standing on the rubble and feeling, as I think most Americans did, when he talked about, I think, in a sense, avenging these deaths, feeling a true sense of patriotism and American pride. And frankly, it all seemed to go downhill from there. We quickly turned into it's an unwinnable war. Islam is a religion of peace. Yeah, maybe the U.S. had it coming. We've been fucking around in the Middle East for too long. And, it's, as you said, we've kind of gone in the wrong direction ever since, philosophically.
Who invited on the potty mouth guy? People worried about me being on this show. This guy, I love it. No, I mean, I understand. It's a serious. I mean, it's a passion-driven topic. I understand. But remember, it's a family show. We got people.
Right. We'll get it in post. We'll bleep it out in post.
We'll edit it in post. But here's the thing: for the way I see it, again, the argument over is Islam peace or not, and kind of how to respond to them is that's kind of a relatively easy thing to sort of contend with. But understanding that George Bush and his friends are Christians more than they are pro-American in the best sense of it. So he's more of a evangelical than he is a founding father type of American. So he doesn't understand individualism. He's not for it. So his response to 9/11 is to say, Islam means peace, and we need to distribute, free lunches around Afghanistan, and then we specifically should invade Iraq for the very reason that they're not the ones who attacked us on 9/11, and for the reason that they're not an Islamist country. They're definitely a dictatorship, but Iraq at the time is more of on the secular fascist end of the spectrum. So that understanding that's much more woke, so to speak. That's much more advanced. Yes.
About the woke you said. So some people might have heard what I said earlier and say, these backward Greeks. Actually, let me remind you that the blowback theory, because all these things have one thing in common, that the idea is America brought it to herself. let me remind you that the blowback theory had central stage in the GOP primaries in 2008. It was the so-called Ron Paul Giuliani moment. Now, you know that I've talked sympathetically about some aspects of the Paul campaigns, but think about this one. The thing that made Ron Paul more popular among many, many people was basically telling that 9/11 was, in a way, we brought it to ourselves. So before, dear viewers, you said, oh, these Balkans or these backward people in the Middle East who consider this a blowback, this is very, very central in the American society as well, and in the universities. So I remember for years in my university in Greece, there was a graffiti that said something monstrous like, here it rhymes in Greek, here I can see a Boeing flying over Manhattan, I wish every day was 9/11. And now that I think about it, how fitting that this monstrosity stayed there for years in a university. In a way, it is a fitting place for these ideas, because all this moral relativism and all this, oh, you know, the jihadis and the US, who can tell who is right, their root is the universities. So maybe that wasn't such a surprise.
Yeah, I mean, definitely once we understand the philosophical landscape, it's much easier to understand what took place. So, like I said, George Bush and the Republicans were largely Christian evangelicals. Their answer to everything is turn the other cheek. So as much as Bush is kind of, he was sort of painted as this war hawk, he was a very sloppy, altruistically driven type of war hawk that basically the plan was, spread democracy, so to speak, and everyone will elect themselves into liberty. And of course, that's not what happened. The Iraqis, I don't know who they elected, definitely not a Jeffersonian Democrats. And of course, the Palestinians elected some lovely folks as well. I mean, and that's Bush. But then we've got, the mainstream secular, basically leftist, postmodern, just everything that comes out of the universities as in the name of anti-religion, in the name of science and rationality. Of course, we've got hatred of reality, rejection of reality, hatred of capitalism. So when the tallest buildings in New York are hit by an airplane, literally the World Trade Center is hit by religious fundamentalists, it's only a matter of time before the left is going to side with the religious anti-capitalists, flying their planes into the buildings. I mean, they're not going to be pro-capitalism. They're not going to be pro-reality, pro-civilization, pro-individual rights. So understanding all of this today makes it much easier to contend with what took place. But for most people, sadly, they are the victims of modern philosophy, of the disintegration of the culture, and they're always going to be a little bit, more than a little bit confused. Jonathan?
I want to say one thing, because I know you guys keep this show wonderfully tight. I think it's important as well. I have to say one kind of positive note, in the sense that it's very easy, even now, we've all expressed kind of a disappointment about philosophically what's happened in the last 20 years. But you know what? 20 years on, the Middle East was a cesspool back then, and it's even more of a cesspool now. I mean, ex-Israel, it's just one tribal, backward, third world, collectivist, fundamentalist ideology fighting another. And you know what? America, with all of its flaws, last year, I went to that Freedom Tower. And you know what? It's pretty cool. It's not the same as a World Trade Tower, but it's pretty amazing as well. I went to some of what America's created. I mean, 20 years later, we've created social media. I mean, America, I don't think it can be put down. Certainly not as something as backward as fundamental Islam. So it's easy to be kind of down on where we've gone, but America was not put down by this. And that tower, is kind of trouble as it was to put up, is, I think, the best example that, if we stay strong, militant Islam is no threat for the West and for Americanism as we know it.
Oh, I agree. I agree that that technological innovation has continued to impress and to amaze. I've certainly benefited from it. But I would even go a step further than to say, if we stay strong, militant Islam is not a threat. I would say militant Islam is a footnote in history if America and the Western countries embrace reason, embrace capitalism, and therefore a precise and effective and focused foreign policy that would have wiped out the Islamic threat in 1979 when it began to rear its ugly head. And the Middle East today could be one giant Disneyland water park if the U.S. had embraced reason and capitalism a long time ago. So
it's like they're just now celebrating, gee, women can drive. Like, yeah, it's friggin' 2020. Where have you been for hundreds and hundreds of years? It's so
yeah. I mean,
change.
To give out, I mean, you're saying some controversial things today, which, you know, in the mainstream is controversial. That you're disparaging the Middle East as is not really accepted. So I'll throw in my own derogatory statement. I mean, my favorite today is we're celebrating that miscellaneous kingdoms and quasi-theocracies in the Middle East that are not at war with Israel are now declaring normalized relationship with Israel. They should all be terrified of Israel in the first place. Israel should have made it very clear a very long time ago. Anyone who blinks at us the wrong way and let alone thinks of firing a missile our way is going to get a disproportionate response. And from there would have come peace, would have come trade, would have come flourishing and a renaissance. But of course, just like America's problem is our own philosophical inner workings, so is Israel's. Similarly, they're contending with Kantian modern philosophy on one side versus religion on the other. So, you know, like Nikos mentioned that people in Greece were saying that 9/11 was an inside job. In a way, it was, philosophically speaking. Philosophically speaking, it's all an inside job. See what I'm saying? Just like your happiness, you know, requires some inside work. America, to be properly self-defensive, requires an inside job philosophically. I hope I'm being clear about that, because the look on your face, Jonathan, is a little...
No, I get it. It's just the power of, I'm just in awe of the power of ideas and how people who live very close to each other and essentially live in that same metaphysical world, as you said, Ruck, can have such completely different views of that world based on those fundamental ideas.
But to end on a positive note, you know, quite often people say, oh, you know, Americans, they are this, they are that. Let's think about some of the stories that came out of 9/11. So one story I've heard, which I haven't corroborated, but I've heard from many, there were so many people in wheelchairs that because they couldn't go down with the elevators, their co-workers or people who didn't even know them helped them to go down. Or the heroic actions of the firefighters. And now, this is not, quote, self-sacrifice. It's that at the moment of crisis, you realize I can do more. You realize now that in a way history is calling on me, I will stand up to the occasion. And one more thing, the last beautiful moment that I've probably seen, and maybe the only good one with Bush, is that video where he's with the firefighter. And the power of this video is that even one of, in my opinion, the really, really bad presidents of the United States, when he understands the moral gravitas of his role, something very beautiful can come out of it. And I encourage people. I used to show this video to class in the university, in the class on disasters and how after a disaster you've got this. I don't want to say ever that the George Bush video brought tears in my eyes, because it doesn't, but I get a lump on my throat. It's very powerful. And now, within context, Bush was so bad and his reaction to 9/11 was really, really bad. But the power of this moment shows that this country is indeed special. And there is something very special in what we see behind Jonathan on the idea of Americanism, that Americanism is something which is important. So I'd like to finish the show with Jonathan telling us something, what is Americanism and why people should feel proud of it. Americans, but also people outside of America who understand and who get inspired by it.
I'll make it quick, Nikos, thank you. And I'll end on, as you said, a positive note. There's nothing positive to take away from 9/11, but one of the inspiring stories you mentioned to me is Todd Beamer's story, who was on one of those planes, and the phrase "let's roll," go back and read the story of how he and his cohorts said, we're not just going to be victims here. We're going to get up and try to overpower and take control of the situation. And to me, that is that true American self-assertiveness, not self-sacrifice, but selfishness that says my life is important. Every day of my life is vital. I'm going to make the most of it. I'm going to think and protect my right to live my own life. So that, to me, Todd Beamer's story is what my takeaway of 9/11, of that true Americanism, selfishness in the best sense of the word.
Yeah.
Rucka, parting words are on you.
Well, thank you guys for clarifying that altruism is not the same as springing into action when there's an emergency. Now, I think these types of emergencies, such as 9/11 or a natural disaster, would be largely eliminated nearly completely or completely by a truly capitalist society. But even so, in a semi-free, enlightened country like America, when tragedy does strike, to see people spring into action, to donate blood, to go in and rescue who they can, that is not altruism. Altruism would be giving more blood than your body can afford to give up. Or altruism would be sending your parents and children into the building for the possibility of them saving somebody else. I mean, that's altruism. I mean,
or sending blood to the Taliban who masterminded or were celebrating.
Of course, which is sadly what we ended up doing. If you actually measure blood and treasure, America ended up basically sending our own soldiers to give up their lives and limbs for the possibility that there's some humanity in the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. So but let's always remind people, altruism is not benevolence. Altruism is not generosity and trade. And it's not, in fact, living by your conviction, even dying by your conviction, is not the same as being altruistic. It's actually the most selfish thing you can do is to fight to the bitter end for what you actually believe to be right.
And a lot of young people, Rucka, as you guys know, signed up after 9/11 for the service. I'm not religious, but I'll say God bless them in quotes, because they believed in the ideas of this country and were willing to fight and die for them.
Well, Nikos, take us out.
Oh, I can't top that. I think this was seriously one of the best endings for the show. So I have nothing to add. Many thanks to Jonathan. I think he's a great add-in to the show. Many thanks to Rucka. It's one of the shows that I won't say I enjoyed the most, but it was one of the most emotionally powerful for me. So thanks to my co-host and thanks to everyone who has watched or who is watching. Thank you very much. All the best.